I'm gonna stop recording.
That's our cold open, right?
Broadcasting live from a bedroom in Medford, Massachusetts. It's And Another Thing, the podcast where we talk a little bit more about pieces of media that we think you should give either another look to or a more critical look to. As always, I'm your host, Drew Weisberg. This is my co-host, Isaac Wilde. And welcome to our inaugural episode. I don't really know why I said as always, because this is the first time we've done this. But we just thought we'd start out the show by talking a little bit about ourselves and letting you all know who we are. As you can probably tell by my attire, I'm a tough student. I study film and media as my undergraduate degree. And on the side, I am a filmmaker for Arlington Community Media. And I also do some writing on the side, as Isaac will note. I'm one of the co-writers on Isaac's website, which I'll actually pass it over to him right now. Isaac? Please.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Isaac. I'm a tough student as well, studying English and education, and I'm an aspiring writer and English teacher. And I've created a website called isaacwildewrites.com, where I offer writing advice across genres and mediums for game design, such as Dungeons and Dragons, or more general storytelling advice.
Yeah. So without further ado, I think we should probably get into our inaugural topic. And our inaugural topic today is, you can tell by the fact that we're laughing already, that this is something I've been very excited to talk about. Today we'll be covering The Room, which is written by, directed by, produced by, and starring Tommy Wiseau, who, for those of you who don't know, is a riddle of a man, really.
An enigma.
Yeah, he's a complete unknown quantity. But what we like to do on the show is every episode will have not only main topics, such as The Room, but we'll also have a companion piece that we feel adds to the discussion or otherwise expands on our understanding of the material. And this week we're talking a little bit about The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero, who is one of the co-stars on the movie, as well as the film's line producer. Fun fact about that. That's probably my thesis on this film. This movie is horrible in every aspect. Every part of me
No redemption.
was screaming as I was watching this film.
Oh, no.
It was poorly edited, poorly shot. The audio mixing was bizarre. Every choice made seemed to elicit more questions. And I think, unironically, everyone on planet Earth should watch this film. We enter into the eponymous room, which is Johnny, played by Tommy Wiseau, the main character, enters his domicile and says,
"Hi, babe. I have something for you."
to his fiancée Lisa.
Yeah.
Although the fact that their relationship is not made clear until maybe 15 minutes into the film.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I couldn't quite put my finger on why characters... There was this odd feeling that characters just enter. And their name is said, and then they begin performing action.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Oh, hey, Johnny, what's up?
I have a problem with Lisa.
I didn't really realize what was wrong with that until maybe 10 minutes in, at which point I began to realize, oh, Tommy Wiseau thinks that establishing a character means them entering a scene.
And stating.
Oh, hi, Danny.
Every scene feels artificial because the set they're in is all built on sound stages. And
despite having the actual place that they intended to be filming, like next door, they chose to recreate a rooftop or an alleyway and film in their recreation rather than on the actual rooftop.
And it becomes abundantly clear that these spaces do not feel alive. All the windows are clearly not using natural light. And so there's no warmth in any of the scenes. And these scenes do take place during the day. I don't want to dismiss that. And so what you end up feeling is this deep sense of odd sterility, where you are in an environment that you know should be inviting and livable because it's someone's home, but it feels so barren, and then the light coming in feels off. I thought of it, and it feels like purgatory.
That's especially how like muted the audio quality is, and how everyone's giving these flat deliveries where entirely devoid of the proper emotion that they should be expressing.
Hi.
Can I help you?
Yeah, can I have a dozen red roses, please?
Oh, hi, Johnny. I didn't know it was you.
Film is notorious for ADR, which are lines recorded after the fact. And the trouble with ADR is that it is typically seen as a last resort, because if an actor does not deliver the correct emotion or line in the scene, going back and recording it and trying to get an actor into that mindset and that character thought process and that environment, it can be incredibly difficult, especially if they're just doing it on something like a soundstage. And it really, really comes through, which is problematic, because I'd say half of Tommy's lines are ADR.
Yeah, because Greg has, in The Disaster Artist, Greg gives really interesting looks at Tommy Wiseau's acting process, in which he can't remember his lines, even simple lines that he wrote himself, or he can't remember his blocking, where he is so conscious about like not bumping his head on something that it takes him 10 minutes to walk across the set. So like that so much of his performance was riddled with errors in the actual filming.
I'm glad that you pointed out that concept of errors, because the film has a very loose sense of continuity as well.
Right. In a way, error isn't quite the right word, because the film doesn't care if it's an error or not.
It's less that there are continuity errors and more that there is no continuity.
At all.
Events happen and then just there's no impact. If you actually broke down the central narrative of The Room, it is a story where Johnny is the perfect man, essentially, and he is in love with his fiancée Lisa, who is presented to us as this godly woman who then betrays him and cheats on him with his best friend Mark.
Right.
And at the end of the film, Tommy discovers their affair and commits suicide. There are and that's maybe 30 minutes of the plot. It's an almost 2-hour film. And that accounts for, I would say, 20 to 25% of the story. The rest of the story is populated by these bizarre moments.
I got the results of the test back. I definitely have breast cancer.
I don't have them anymore.
What kind of drugs, Denny?
Anything for my princess.
How much was it?
I was describing this film to someone I was talking to last night, and I laid out every side tangent and little episode that I could think of, and I said something like, or something to the effect of, if you're totally confused by what I just said, then I did an excellent job explaining the film.
Right.
It's so interesting to watch someone with no prior film experience,
right,
almost no acting experience.
In fact, stark failures in attempting to gain acting experience.
And what I would describe as a loose understanding of the English language, attempting to write arguably the most difficult to translate genre on the planet, that being drama, and And yet it's just part of the problem with discussing The Room and why we wanted to use the disaster artist as this marking point is because there's only so many times you can say it just isn't good.
Right, before the point is kind of exhausted.
And everyone and their mother, every film geek has at some point or another talked about The Room and its many mistakes and oddities. The most famous of which I think are the spoons in the frames.
The disaster artist mentioned this.
Right.
Going back to the point about how barren the setting can be, how devoid of the livelihoods that an actual human would decorate their set with. Tommy framed, what was it, pictures of plastic spoons? Do I have that right?
I believe so. Yeah, it was because that was what came in the frame. It's actually a bit of a wonder that nobody on set, well, it's not a wonder. Tommy would regularly fire people who defied him.
Over and over, a very consistent pattern of anyone who spoke back to him was out. And if he fired the director of photography, it meant the entire film crew would leave with the director. And
because there was this promise of, I don't know, sanity that certain people on set guaranteed.
yeah.
Script supervisors, people who had worked in the industry. Maybe people who could have told Tommy that you didn't need two kinds of camera.
Yeah, do you want to go more into detail about that?
I would love to. Because this is something that irritated me somewhat, or is that, again, Tommy clearly did not understand what equipment was necessary to create a motion picture, and as such, he decided to buy both an HD camera, which at the time was
ludicrously
overpriced, $250,000.
Yeah.
1/24 of the film's budget
went to this camera.
What Tommy did was he created this device where he could mount both next to each other and film simultaneously. And what I have to point out is that these two mediums are not compatible, really.
No.
In fact, they are lit differently. There are different concerns when filming them.
Yeah.
Shooting on physical film can have errors in the film itself, and so you need a specialist to work with film. And again, the lighting is different. And what's more bizarre is that Tommy only edited the film version of the movie. The HD footage is out there, presumably lit incorrectly, and filmed at a slightly different angle. And to me, it's the holy grail of lost media. Because there is another version of The Room that Tommy never edited.
He just wasted $250,000 on this HD camera that he never used.
Which is another thing that I think we should touch on is the concept of money in relation to The Room and how much of it was wasted. $6 million, and again, let's check off where all the money went. Okay, HD camera, that's $250,000. Tommy bought all of the equipment.
When the standard was to rent the equipment because it would go obsolete within a few months.
Which is everyone agrees is the industry standard.
Yeah, and Tommy just bought it to own for no reason.
The script supervisor went to cash a check that Tommy'd given him, and he said to himself, no, it has to bounce.
This check's not going through.
It's not going through. It's going to bounce. And he handed a check to Tommy's bank.
Yeah.
This is the bank teller who had worked with Tommy's money. Slides the check over, and the bank teller says, "Oh, you don't need to worry about this bouncing. This account is like a bottomless pit."
And the disaster artist brings up the amount of money required for a bank teller whose job is in being discreet about his client's finances to mention something so personal as it being a bottomless pit.
There is an odd, again, yet another mystery is Tommy's wealth.
Yeah.
Tommy owns, throughout the course of the disaster artist, we learn Tommy owns, at minimum, an apartment in San Francisco, one of the most expensive places to live on the planet.
For sure.
An apartment in Los Angeles, one of the other most expensive places in the world to live, and at minimum, one other building that is prime real estate in San Francisco that by the end of the film he sells off. And Tommy had a fairly recent media promotion where he's shown in a Los Angeles home.
A lot of people be afraid. They're afraid to enjoy this.
In any other context, I would probably say, oh, that must have been a mansion he rented with Airbnb. I fully believe that is Tommy Wiseau's residence in Los Angeles. Moving on to Greg. Greg is less of an unknown quantity, partially because he's our narrator in The Disaster Artist. And Greg is a model, and he was an aspiring actor who I would say was essentially chewed up by the Hollywood machine.
Yeah, in what he presented as a typical case of how cruel the Hollywood machine was, too. Like, he wasn't especially targeted. It was just such a cutthroat industry that it was really brutal on him.
Even when being represented by a famous talent agency,
Even being good-looking and charismatic.
And for the most part, an agreeable human being.
Yeah.
And clearly has ability. It's just, and training. He's trained with great acting coaches. He is not a troubled human. There's no real element of oddity to him. He is, in almost every respect, just another good-looking face that Hollywood eventually threw out. There's very
discarded as like so much, like there's millions of nice-looking 20-year-old boys with pretty faces who Hollywood has to churn through to get to the real gems.
Mm-hmm. And it's how he gravitates towards Tommy is...
Yeah, like if this normal guy had one oddity, it's the fact that he chose of his own volition to involve himself with Tommy Wiseau's mystery.
Which is also interesting because it becomes very clear that Tommy has elements of him that are exploitative, if not somewhat predatory.
Even abusive, maybe.
More than a bit. There's a very interesting scene that Greg recounts where, first of all, Tommy was Greg's landlord in LA. He had inherent power over Greg and Greg's future in Hollywood. And so Greg would not have been able to afford Hollywood had it not been for Tommy.
He was living for $200 a month in a really nice place in Los Angeles.
The only oddity, again, being these streaks of black dye.
Black hair dye in the sink.
That Tommy had. And there's a scene that Greg recounts where Tommy decides to go for a drive and essentially say, you can't live here. And he's threatening Greg's future. And when Greg finally comes to his senses, Tommy apologizes and says, no, you can continue living in my house.
Yeah.
And it's this scene where Greg notes that Tommy's mask, for the first time, kind of slips off, and he experiences Tommy how other people experience Tommy.
Yeah.
Because Greg, for lack of better terms, always has, and I think always, in a way, will have these blinders. And it's nothing more than, this is Greg's friend.
Yeah.
They are friends. And so it becomes this very sad story of, there comes a point where Greg can no longer defend his friend's behavior.
Yeah.
And at that point, the story goes from comedy to tragedy.
Yeah, it was shocking how these two silly, kind of goonish characters, as their relationship started to crumble, I really started to feel for them, despite the fact that if I saw Tommy on the street, I would have been like, hey, that's a vampire, I'm gonna cross the road. Greg presents himself in contrast as a foil to Tommy. Tommy's weirdness is contrasted by Greg's normalcy. But reading The Disaster Artist, I was struck by how Greg has his own biases that I could kind of see in the narrative. He was not a clean window through which to view this story. And one of these was that Greg tries to pass himself off as normal. He has a girlfriend, he can interact with people, but he is also quite lonely. Like, he just has no one in his life besides Tommy. And though Tommy is presented as a total like weirdo in relation to him, he needs Tommy as much as Tommy needs him. And it was like, I found so weird that Greg rarely acknowledged that part of himself, almost as though he was like ashamed of it in a way.
There's an odd, almost self-destructive quality to Greg that you understand through both the filming of The Room and also Greg's relationships that he describes in The Disaster Artist, up to the point where he essentially lost his relationship with his girlfriend over the production of The Room.
Yeah.
And he expresses this feeling of not it being the last straw, but a breakdown. And the fact that The Room was... We should probably explain that Greg was not necessarily in the room of his own volition.
Right.
Tommy offered him what Greg has described as a life-changing amount of money. It's never specified the exact sum that is, but for the approximately 4 months it took to shoot The Room, I can't argue that Greg wasn't almost enslaved to the production.
Yeah.
He received about 5% of what he would receive up front, as well as a new car.
Yeah.
And then, after the film was completed, he'd receive the other 95%. There's definitely an interesting dynamic they have where Greg is exhibiting what I can only describe as the beginning stages of Stockholm Syndrome.
Exactly. There's a line where he's like, I was shocked to realize that I had a price. Which I thought that's a great line of like a person coming to terms with the fact that they really have been kidnapped and that they're okay with it.
Oh yeah, he was not originally cast as Mark. He was in fact originally just the film's line producer.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that Tommy edged out another actor he himself had hired so that Greg could take on this role.
Yeah.
There's an almost cultish quality to The Room in so much as there are so many points where you think to yourself, that would be my breaking point.
Yeah.
That would be where I would get off the train. And it's amazing that these industry professionals, these people who have worked on any number of films, these
actual films,
are so stunned, but they're also so entrapped. And I think that really says how much control that sort of financial domination has.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there was no other producer to run to.
Right.
Tommy credits, as we learn in The Disaster Artist, a dead man as one of his executive producers. he constantly refers to this phantom troupe of producers and financiers that, to our knowledge, do not exist outside of Tommy's world, which creates an even more oppressive environment because there really is nowhere to run.
Yeah.
And the feeling that's described on set is one of claustrophobia, and it becomes this incredibly tense environment
Where Tommy's specter was like always hanging over the film studio.
made almost literally so by the fact that Tommy would require a behind-the-scenes footage reel that would be used later to spy on the cast and crew.
He had this one guy follow every event going on with a camera, and for, as always with Tommy, enigmatic purposes. But it was later revealed that Tommy would spend hours and hours rewatching this footage so that he could know what people were saying about him. If I had one takeaway from The Room, like, there's this mess of a movie, and once you shave away that mess, to find, if at all possible, the little golden granule at the inside, that might make it all worth it. It's the idea of, like, I'm an aspiring artist, and I could read Greg Sestero's story as like a real tragedy of, like, man, if you pursue your dream, the only ending is to get swamped by this horrible project and to lose all your passion. But I don't think that was my takeaway. I think the takeaway of what I got from it was, what could I accomplish if I told myself, you know what, I am the greatest? And I didn't just tell myself that, but I believed it. If I had like the confidence that Tommy had to literally bet everything on my own ability, like, how far could I go if I lost those restrictions of society, like, holding me back?
Right. In my summation, The Room is one of the greatest examples of idiot savantism I think I've ever seen. It's the idea of, it is the perfect encapsulation of shoot for the moon. If you miss, you'll land amongst the stars. He loves this, and he got to have his dream one way or another. And there's an odd sincerity to his acceptance of this all.
Yeah.
Tommy has unknowingly played both the villain and now the hero of his own story. Thank you so much for joining us for our first episode, our inaugural voyage. We'll be back. We have lots of fun topics planned.
Oh, yeah.
We have plenty coming up, and we really hope that you'll stick around and join us next time. And welcome to this little adventure. We will see you soon, and we hope you enjoyed yourself. Goodbye, everyone.